Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection Podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection Podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfin. Jeremy and Taylor, our two friends from Yellowstone, gave us this wonderful guest who we have on now, and we're going to continue our trek through Scandinavia mostly, and we're going to talk more about wolves in Sweden. With this next individual, she got her PhD from the University of Rome, and she works with the Scandinavian Wolf Project. She is Cecilia Di Bernardi. Cecilia, it's so wonderful to meet you and put a face to a name. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you. Nice to meet you too.
Yeah. This is just really, it's good because we spoke with Daniel Malwitz, and he got a lot of good positive feedback on that episode. And we've been really, really blessed to have all of the folks here in North America give us these international names like yourself, Daniel, and a few others that we're trying to get in contact with. So it's really great to have you on to talk about your focus, talk about your work, and just give everybody a little bit more of a global perspective on large carnivores and wolves in general. But just tell everyone, where did you grow up? What was your background? How did you get involved working with wolves and large carnivores and all that?
Yes. So I originally come from Rome, from Italy. So I grew up in a very big city, and I think every opportunity to get out of it was a great one. My family, and especially my grandfather, had a farm with horses and cows. So I would go and horse ride with my grandfather and family almost every week. So I think that was the initial connection with the animal world. And but if we think about how it started with the science in general and then with wolves, I think I don't have a strict memory, a precise memory of how it started, actually. But what I remember is that when I was reading this book that it's called The King Solomon Ring of Conrad Lorenz, the ethologist Conrad Lorenz, I actually realized that what I liked, so looking at animals and their behavior, it actually had a name. It was a discipline, and it was studying ethology. So I literally realized that I could make this passion of observing animals and how they behave into a job, which is the wildlife ecologist and wildlife conservationist that I'm at the moment. So that was really great. And for wolves, that's a funny story because it goes in different steps. So I actually started with capuchin monkeys in South America, looking at their behavior, their anti-predator behavior, and if they had a cultural transmission of this anti-predator behavior. And then I moved into Arctic foxes in Norway, looking at the fitness and the survival and reproductive success of Arctic foxes. And from there, I started my PhD on wolves. So I slowly moved up into the globe, I would say.
Into the carnivores, yeah. That is so fascinating that you talk about that upbringing for you in Rome, because it's interesting that you have really the same connection with a lot of folks who research in North America that may be born in big cities or born in places where there's not necessarily that much wilder nature around, and the need or the connection, like you said, growing up on a farm and riding horses led you to want to be in this ecology space. What were those feelings like for you, I guess, early on to move into this? Was there, I know there's not a specific moment, but why did you feel so deeply connected to animals at that point to make this a career path?
Well, I think this is a question I will never be able to answer because it just happened, and it felt so natural in a way to get into these studies. And I think maybe, as I said, it happened when I realized that animal behavior could be studied and we could understand animals with a scientific approach, asking questions, testing hypotheses. And this was what I wanted to do. And also, I guess we will get there with our conversation, trying to understand how to coexist with most of these animals with which we can have conflicts and oppositions.
Yeah. For your upbringing, was there any discussion about predators that were around, or was there really any discussion because you come from, a farming background? What was the attitude or the perception of predators, carnivores, anything that would be on the landscape that would be detrimental, or anything that would have sort of a rub against what your family was producing, whether it was, I don't know if it was chickens, goats, whatever it may be. Was there any discussion around the dinner table about predators or carnivores, maybe, back in the day or as you were growing up? Did any of those things ever come up?
Actually, if I think about it, not really about large carnivores. That was not something into my family background, I would say. But what was a problem was already wild boars back then. So an issue with wild
Okay.
boars damaging fields and damaging the grass, for example, and eating from the olive trees. So around olive trees. So that was already an issue. And my grandfather actually was a hunter. So it's interesting because I come from Italy, where hunting is not really well seen from the general
Hmm.
community, I would say. We have a strong animal welfare and animal right component of the society. And so I was grown up with a hunter grandfather, but also a strong social perspective where hunting was not really accepted or supported, at least. But then I moved to Sweden, where it's very different. And as Daniel said, hunting is a strong culture for Sweden. So I think these 2 points, living in Italy first, growing up in Italy with this idea of hunting, and then moving to Sweden and really trying, and I would say succeeding in really trying to understand all the aspects of hunting and how that is related with management of, for example, of large ungulates, which is something that back in Italy I couldn't even imagine. And I understood during my studies of biology and conservation and wildlife management.
Wow. So yeah, just talk about, was there a culture shock, or I guess literally and figuratively, because as we all know, any of us that move around in, from country to country or within countries, at least for myself, right? Moving from one side to the other, everything changes. So was there a culture shock for you, or were you more thinking, I want to learn about this and study this more so than sort of be taken aback by the shock of maybe the differing culture there?
Yeah, I think it's a very nice question, because I mean, I think it's both, and it's mostly the second thing that you say. So I was really curious, and the more shocking, the more I wanted to dig into it, because it was so interesting and so different. And what's different makes me definitely curious and wanting to dig more, dig more into it. But what I can tell you is that the first day I arrived in Grimsö, the first day I arrived actually in Sweden, I arrived to the station, and it was actually the one of the first days of the moose hunt. So welcoming me in the research station was a dead moose, right, ready
Oh,
for being
jeez.
slaughtered. So, and I had never seen a moose before, so that for sure was a shock. But I have what's also very interesting, I think, is that around me, I know a lot of hunters, and they are friends of mine. So we can really go deep into the discussion with no filters, no boundaries. So we can challenge each other, no, and also provoke each other, which really helps to try to understand.
That's great, because those are the things that we feel. I can only speak for myself and maybe this country a little bit, as talking about the American West, is those conversations seem to have been lost over time and not being able to have a civil discourse. I'm not speaking for everyone, obviously, but I think in the general sense, when we talk about carnivores and their impact on society and the feeling that people get with myth, legend, lore, stories, things that have come down from our upbringing, we tend to be cemented in our beliefs and not having those discussions. So for you to be able to have those conversations, as you said, what is that civil discourse like? I mean, I'm sure does it get heated at all, or are you literally sitting and having, like you said, these deep, thoughtful conversations about management, hunting, and the reasons for and against, and you guys are able to, have a pint or whatever it is over these kind of things?
Yeah, I think it's over a glass of wine or a glass of beer.
That's fair. Yeah.
And and it can certainly warm up, but it's more really sometimes me provoking the other by asking, okay, but if this is so, why do you do so? Like really never leaving something
Unspoken.
unspoken in a way, exactly. So no, but I think it's full honesty, and also just me coming from a different background and trying to understand the background where I'm living now, actually since 6 years, and I'm learning more and more about my surroundings and the management of large carnivores and ungulates in Sweden, but I know anything. I know nothing. So
Right.
it's really, as I think, as Daniel said, it's very complex and very entangled. So to disentangle it, it will take more time.
Right. More time and more conversation, which is great that both of you are so open to having those conversations. And that's what we found when we spoke to Daniel about his approach and how he's able to be very straightforward, which
exactly.
In a way, sometimes being confrontational, not even confrontational, but being very blunt or straightforward sometimes doesn't get the best reaction,
No.
but sometimes it's the only way to do things. And you guys clearly are doing that in a good way. So talk about your research a little bit and your study area, because before we hopped on and we started recording, it's very interesting to me how you described, most of your work is in Sweden, but you talk about Scandinavia. So give people, I guess, an idea of what encompasses Scandinavia first and foremost, and where in this section of the world are you doing this research that you're talking about, this ecology and watching wolves and things of that sort?
Yes, so basically, when I talk about Scandinavia, I talk about the Scandinavian wolf population, which is in Sweden and Norway. So it's shared between Sweden and Norway, and around 80% is in Sweden, if I'm not wrong. So it's really center-south Sweden, center-south Scandinavia. And I say that because this is a population that is separated from the Finnish Russian population. And actually, as also Daniel was saying, the Scandinavian wolf population was founded by immigrants that came all the way from the Finnish Russian population down into central Sweden. And that's the starting point with the first breeding in 1983. Of wolves in Scandinavia, and from there, that's where the population started. So, and that's indeed the target of my research. And my research focuses on diet, on wolf diet, using wolf scats and doing DNA analysis on these wolf scats to study the prey composition. And it would sound crazy that my study area is Scandinavian. Actually, for this study on scats, it's focused on Sweden. And it sounds crazy that the whole wolf distribution is my study area, because how the hell am I going to collect all these scat samples across Sweden? And the answer is quite amazing, because it's the county administrative boards in Sweden, so Länsstyrelsen, as it's done for Norway as well, that they collect scats for the genetic monitoring of the Scandinavian wolf population. And they do that from October to March every winter. So it's a yearly monitoring where they collect scats and they track wolves, and they also collect other kind of samples. So, for example, other like urine samples, and these are used to basically detect the number of family groups and the number of marking pairs of wolves. So the number of territories overall each year and the number of reproductions. And basically what I've done during my PhD is that I have taken these samples that were used for knowing about the wolves, and I've asked a new question using the same samples. What about their diet? What about the prey that is in the same scats?
That's interesting. So when you're looking at the DNA, because this is great that we had Daniel on to discuss really the management side, and you're the scientific side of on the other end of that collection of scats. So when you do the DNA research, what goes into that? How are you breaking down these scats to figure out the markers of each individual pack or family group? What are the things you're looking for? Obviously, you're specific about prey, but what other things can come out of the scat and the DNA that you guys find other than what they've been eating?
So basically, what the monitoring is doing yearly is to identify wolf individuals. So basically, from each scat, they get the DNA and they get the wolf individual that has been dropping that scat or that urine. And that will help to basically identify the individuals that are, for example, in marking pairs or family groups. And really the focus is the marking individuals. And on top of that, what's really incredible about this monitoring is that the monitoring is able to retrieve the pedigree of the population, of the Scandinavian wolf population. And actually, I wish I had a slide to show you, but it's incredible because it's a family tree, it's a pedigree from the founders, so from the first individuals. And you can really see how from few points you get to this big network of territories. And also what comes out of this pedigree is actually the inbreeding coefficient of almost each individual wolf. And with the inbreeding coefficient, you can actually look into the relatedness of individuals. And when new individuals are coming in, the inbreeding coefficient changes. So, and this population actually is highly inbred, and different scientific studies has shown that. And I think what comes with all this information is also great responsibility to look into the effects of inbreeding on the population, of inbreeding depression, because there is not much genetic variation in this population. So what are the consequences of this for this population? If we think about the fitness of wolves, do they have a lower survival? Do they reproduce later on? Do they have malformations? So actually the Scandinavian wolf population is studying these different things on how the inbreeding depression of the Scandinavian wolf population is affecting specifically the fitness of these wolves. And what I've been adding with my research on diet is if inbred wolves actually have a different diet, because maybe they are more vulnerable, maybe they are less capable of killing a large prey like moose, and they would go on a smaller prey like roe deer, or even they would do more scavenging. Yeah, so what I wanted to add is within the PhD, I've been mostly working with scats, but we have done another study which we did with GPS collars. So wolves that were wearing GPS collars and producing cluster of points, and the field personnel would go and visit this cluster of points. And this has been done by Scandal for over 20 years. So what I've done during this PhD, Scandal, the Scandinavian wolf population project, the Scandinavian wolf project. So now I am so used to call it Scandal. So I always go for that. But what was interesting is that during these years with the Scandal project, we took all these predation studies that I've done with GPS collared wolves, and we actually checked how much scavenging are these wolves doing, because we know a lot about predation, and this is what the project has been focusing for many years. But we were curious to add a piece of the puzzle, given that we had all this amazing data about scavenging as well. And we could see actually that the Scandinavian wolf population is displaying lower level of scavenging compared to other populations in Europe. And so they mainly predate, and they mainly spend time on carcasses that they have predated themselves. So they do quite little scavenging. But actually, connecting to the inbreeding, the more inbred wolves actually were doing more scavenging. And maybe this is actually related to the fact that more inbred wolves are more vulnerable, are more weak, and maybe they rather go and scavenge instead of hunting and predating a prey.
I have so many questions. This is fascinating. So for the inbreeding part, is there any reason that you all can see why, other than that initial breeding pair? I'm sure there were others. Why is there not a more why isn't there a continuous flow of wolves from that Finnish-Russian population then to counterbalance this inbreeding? Are there not corridors for these wolves to go down into, or is it just they're so isolated to a degree in the study area that there's no other wolves that are able to go here? Because in the United States, which you probably know a little bit about this, is when we have the full corridor open from basically Canada all the way to Mexico. That's where that genetic diversity that is lacking in this population that you're talking about for the United States. That's what we always talk about, genetic diversity, to make sure that genetics are not being passed on. So what do you think the reason is why there isn't more of a free-flowing population set coming from Finland and Russia? If you have the answer, I don't know.
I think one of the reasons, and probably the main one, would be a management reason, because actually what's very important to specify is that between the Finnish-Russian population and the Scandinavian wolf population, there is the semi-domestic reindeer area where Sami are living and they're having their reindeer. And that's a very important part of the culture and of the cultural heritage. So there is a very, very specific management situation
Objective?
where actually
Okay.
wolves are not allowed to breed in those areas. So there is possibilities to remove wolves that are actually establishing territories in those areas. So basically, I would say that few wolves make it all the way down to central South Sweden. But there is studies going on actually on the gene flow between the Finnish-Russian population and the Scandinavian wolf population. So I'm sure it's more complex than this, but I would say that management is playing a role into this low gene flow.
Okay. So with that then, so are you seeing, as you consider this study pack size, population size, are you seeing a lot of fluctuation in this research area that you're talking about? So because there's more inbreeding, I'm sure, in certain packs and certain dynamics there, are these populations fluctuating a lot? Are they staying the same? What are you seeing in those pack dynamics with this level of inbreeding that's happening in this area specifically?
I think this is something actually that it's currently being studied, how level of inbreeding in different packs is affecting pack dynamics. So I don't have a straight answer to that. But we do see fluctuations, and importantly, these fluctuations are also driven by the legal hunt. So in Sweden, there is two kinds of hunting of wolves. There is the licensed hunt, which is annual hunt, annual number, a quota, basically, and the protective hunt, which is hunts that can be done specifically on certain individuals that are creating damages.
So I remember Daniel mentioning that, where he was talking about that if there's a depredation, that's the protected hunt as opposed to the legal hunt that happens with there.
Exactly, and farmers and hunters can get license for hunting wolves.
Does that, how closely, I'm sure you guys work closely together, does any of that affect the research that you're collecting? In, like, if you have scat from a certain pack or a certain, let's say a couple of individuals, and those wolves for some reason are hunted, either protected wise or legally, do you see that a lot of the research fluctuates also, in that you're having a lot of this continued research gathering, and then all of a sudden it just sort of cuts off because those wolves are hunted one way or the other? Or are there agreements? What's the kind of flow of between you and the county and different organizations that you're able to do the research as well as you can without a ton of interruption?
I think that's in a way part of the story, because when, for example, especially with collared wolves, it can happen that they get hunted, and so the study is interrupted. If I think about particularly predation studies where field personnel is actually visiting clusters of points, for scats is a bit different because my area is so wide that I don't have such a focus on specific areas. So I mean, I do cover different areas, but I would say I'm not as affected as when you're doing such a local study with GPS collar wolves. But I would say that this is part of the story in the sense that the management and the legal hunting. So when I think about legal hunting, I think about both the licensed hunt and the protective hunt. They are part of what we're studying. So that's going to be basically a factor in the story, and that's going to be a factor in our models, because we're going to study the impact of, for example, of hunting on the survival or on the mortality or the reproductive success of wolves. So, and I don't know how much agreement there is, but I think I don't know if research would stop a legal hunt. I don't think that's the deal.
That's not the deal, yeah. When you're in these research areas, give everybody a snapshot of the terrain that you're going through, because I've always wanted to visit Scandinavia and these countries because I find them beautiful from the outside. What's the terrain that you're dealing with when you're in these areas? If you can give everybody just sort of an idea of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, so basically, the Scandinavian wolf population goes over a quite broad range. So if we think about central Sweden, we think about boreal forest, but then when we go south, actually, there is more and more agricultural areas. So it really varies. And what's interesting is that wolves have mainly so far until more or less 2019, if I'm not wrong, they were mostly in central south in Sweden. But what's happening since more or less 2019 is that wolves are actually expanding south into counties, into areas that are more into this agricultural landscape, I would say. And that's also where we get when we a bit talk about diet and predation, because what's interesting is that, and now I'm jumping,
It's fine.
I'm myself giving me a question and answering basically, because what's happening is that wolves are expanding south, and if before moose was the main ungulate available to wolves in central Sweden, so with basically a one prey system, and moose was the main prey. Now, when wolves are expanding south, they go from a one prey system to a two prey system, where roe deer starts to be more abundant, actually to a multi prey system, because they also have red deer, fallow deer, and wild boar. So really, the menu can broaden up quite widely. And what's also important is that these species are managed, and these ungulate species, and these species are hunted also by hunters. So there is really a lot of complexity that come into play when wolves are expanding into new areas.
Absolutely. Talk about diet, because this is your focus. And you just said that they're starting to expand south. I've always been interested to see how wolves would hunt wild boar, because I know they are fast, low to the ground. It seems like it's a difficult prey species for them to even say it's a prey species is even a little bit tough to say. But what are you seeing in your research and your study in the scats when they move south? Are you seeing a more diverse, you said obviously the menu widens, but are you actually seeing more deer, ungulate species along with wild boar mix in with the moose that is their main prey species, I would imagine still?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, so that's exactly what we're seeing. And what's interesting is that it really seems like wolves are responding to these changes in ungulate communities, and they are eating more red deer, more roe deer, more fallow deer, and more wild boar the more it's available. But I think for wild boar, I mean, wild boar is so fascinating because to me it almost looks like a competitor than a prey for wolves.
Right.
I've seen some incredible videos of wild boar taking over carcasses from wolves and actually chasing wolves back. So especially when being in a herd with the big individuals, but we do see detection of consumption of wild boar from wolves in the scats. And what we've seen so far is that they do not really select for it. So they eat it when it's available, but they don't over consume it. Actually, what we see is that they eat it when it's available, but they do not look for it. And this is something that actually is not really that they do not look for it. I should correct myself, but they consume it less than what you would expect for what's available. And this is actually what I'm looking into right now. So that's funny because I'm right now running models about this. But what we want to look is like what we think, at least for wild boars, that maybe wolves will start hunting more wild boar later on when they arrive into a territory, when they established a territory. Maybe at the beginning they're not gonna eat a lot of wild boar, but maybe the more they learn, the more they get experience with this species, the more they know this searching image for wild boar indeed, the more they might actually learn how to hunt it. But this is just an hypothesis, and what I'm doing right now is testing if the time since territory establishment is actually affecting the consumption of wild boar in these southern territories where wild boar is available.
What are the pack sizes that you're seeing? Because with this vast array of prey species that are available, what's the typical pack size consumption rate if you have that? Are we talking? Because I know you came to Yellowstone, and we'll talk about that later. Because I know that was great that you were here. But over in your research area and where you're studying here, and you're getting these samples, what's the density or the pack size normally? Because to think about wolves taking down moose in general is obviously tough, but deer are quicker. So are we talking smaller pack sizes, bigger individuals? What are the things that is normal in these areas in terms of wolf presence and population density?
Yeah, I mean, so as you say, it's very different from Yellowstone, and it's a smaller pack size. And I mean, packs and I mean, territories are mainly marking pairs or family groups. So it's basically the parents with the offspring of the year, and it could also be offspring from the previous year that didn't disperse yet. So, and it's really the parents that are doing all the business in the
All the
hunt.
work.
But I mean, if we have to go from literature, we could say it's a pack size of 5 to 6 individuals, for example. The larger pack size that was observed, as far as I remember, is like I think 12 wolves, so way lower than than the records of Yellowstone. But I'm so this is what was observed in Scandinavia. So we're talking about 6 wolves more or less.
Yeah, and so they're fairly. It makes sense, I guess, for the territory with which they cover. What are we talking? Vast territories? Because I know when speaking to Daniel, and please let me know if it's different. The densities were pretty concentrated. So I don't. Is there a lot of interpack dynamics happening with territory, or are they spread out as much as possible? What does that? How does that work over there as well in terms of territory?
So basically, we have like a territory size of more or less 1,000 square kilometer. But what's happening is that when wolves are expanding south, territories are getting smaller, it seems like. And the question on interterritorial interactions is very interesting. And it's, again, something that they're looking more and more right now, because it seems quite different from what happens in Yellowstone. So the interterritorial killing and the strife is not documented in Scandinavia as it is in Yellowstone.
Got it. So when you're looking at diet, and I know this is something that I'm sure is coming along in your research, is there a reason for I wonder if it's just a different taste of meat, and I don't know if this is true or not. But I would venture to guess that wild boar, maybe that are they not getting certain nutrients or certain things they would normally get from an ungulate? Anything you're seeing in the scat that would I don't know if you can even prove that or see what's happening there, but I know when we're talking about ungulates in Yellowstone or anywhere at least in the United States, Alaska, Canada, ungulates have, there's a lot of meat on them that's obviously can be scavenged by multiple different carnivores or predators and birds and stuff like that. So I wonder if there's any validity to that over there, or it's just like what's available, basically, they just go and get because they have such a wide array of species to hunt.
That's a good question, and I think we should. I mean, from scats is quite difficult to look
Okay.
into that, and but we have been speculating about different tastes of different ungulates. But for sure, what I would say it's mostly the vulnerability of the different ungulates and the way they have their anti-predator behaviors for sure. So it seems like wild boar are quite defensive, especially mothers with the little ones. So maybe that's why they're more tough to get.
Yeah, it would seem. Yeah, they look like they're more, like you said, a competitor as more than a prey species, which is pretty wild to think about that. What are the other things that could, and you've touched on a lot of different, what are the other types of research that you're getting from your samples right now and that you're looking to build upon as this study continues? Because I would think people might listen to and say, oh, 6 years is a long time, but it seems like it's almost like you're in the infancy stage of really ramping up all of this research.
Yeah. So I think what we've been discussing a lot since the beginning of my staying here is to really try to understand if we can talk about cultural transmission for predation, and in this case more for diet, as we are working with scats. So what we're building on, I think, is a data set of, we're talking about more or less 2,000 scat samples, where we try to understand how the variation of diet can be explained by, first of all, what's around them. So in this case, the availability and the densities of the ungulates. But I can see that it's not only that, and you see it in the data. So it really seems like there is other factors. For example, who you are, which wolf you are, and who you go with. So if you're alone or if you are in a pack, if you're a female or a male, if you're more or less inbred, how that is affecting your diet. And this is something I've been looking at during my PhD. And we could actually see differences of diet, especially in the consumption of moose as the main prey and roe deer as the alternative prey. But what we want to dig more into is how the experience of the different wolves can affect their diet and how the experience in the natal territory, because that's something it's extremely hard to study, and we are really getting challenged, even 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 if the Scandinavian population is so much studied and we have so much information. So it's really such a great opportunity to dig into the influence of the natal territory and the experience you gain during the natal territory. So that's where we're heading at, with our studies, I would say. And with scats, you can do many other things because we have DNA extracted. So one could look into, I would say, even like parasitology studies. And I think we actually, if you think about it, we actually have samples of scats that are stored in the freezer. So it's only the imagination that we can do many things indeed.
What's the thing that excites you out of the stuff you just said? What is there a particular focus that you are more excited? The cultural thing to me is really interesting because we see that in the wolf populations here about learning about the family structure, in that the parents really have all this knowledge that's delegated down to the offspring and others that come into the pack. And we've talked about different types of disease and things like that over here. What for you gets your juices flowing as you're building all this up? Is there one of those things that you named that you're really focused on right now, that you really are like, I really want to understand this specific thing till I move on to this thing?
I think it's a bit what I said, because I really want to understand what explains all this variation in the diet that we see in these different packs, and really try to see if indeed experience has a role. And it's not only experience that you learn in your natal territory, it's also the experience that you learn in the territory where you are in that very moment. The longer time you are in the territory, the longer you may know about your environment and your competitors and within the same pack, I would say, your conspecifics. But one more thing that it's extremely tough to study, and I would really love to get my hands on that, it's solitary wolves that are dispersing. So sorry, I correct myself. It's actually wolves that are dispersing from the natal territory. What happens to them? On many points of view, movement wise, but also diet wise and fitness wise. So what's the survival of these individuals? What happens to them? And we have been trying to start looking into that with scats, but of course it's extremely difficult to keep track of those individuals, because even with such a I would say nested and huge effort of scat collection, not being the focus, the individual solitary wolves, then less scats are collected from those individuals. They're more like opportunistic collection.
So when you see that wolves are dispersing, are they and I know I asked this earlier about the Finnish and the Russian wolf population having that corridor obviously mostly closed. Do you see any of the population in Scandinavia trying to migrate the other way to Finland and Russia, or are they just basically staying in that same territory that you were talking about in Norway and Sweden and just trying to find their way, their own territory, obviously, away from parents and other types of packs that are around? If you can answer that.
Yeah, this is a good question, and actually I don't know. I think I haven't seen any documented dispersal events on like towards the north. I kind of have the feeling that it's not a good place to be. So, but what we know is that females tend to stay closer to their natal territory, tend to disperse shorter distances compared to males. So usually it's male individuals that are doing longer distances.
Wow. Yeah, that kind of tracks, I think, with all the being the matriarchal society that wolves are. They're obviously the ones that are making sure that the pups and the family structure stays together with that. I always like to ask this, especially when we go global, and it's so great to speak with many of you now, or we're going to be talking with many of you now from Scandinavia, from Sweden. Talk about, and you touched on it slightly, about the social carrying capacity for you, because you have these conversations obviously with friends of yours, people that hunt, and from your perspective as a researcher, how do you feel the social carrying capacity is for wolves? I would say just in general, as you've been there for 6 years, do you feel as though it's basically they've found a happy medium, and I use that loosely, for the people that live in Sweden, and we have these obviously management goals and things are managed so much. What do you feel as you've been there for a while and feel what other people feel in regards to wolves?
Well, that's not an easy question, but I think that there is different levels of acceptance, and it seems like that's really related on how much you have to do with these animals, how much you interact with these animals, how much you're damaged, basically, in the sense that I mean, the main causes of conflict would be, I would say, damages on like depredation on livestock and hunting dogs, especially in Sweden. and as well competition for hunting on moose. And I think that's what I hear the most around. It's mostly because, as I said, knowing hunting hunters and hunter friends, you are literally competing for the moose on your hunting ground. And on top of that, if you hunt moose with hunting dogs, then you risk to have your dog hunted. So that's the frustration I hear around. But I also have different, like I hear different perspectives, even given the frustration, different level of tolerance that are for sure given by different backgrounds and different personal histories.
Yeah, it obviously varies all the way, from everyone there. Let's touch on when you came stateside to Yellowstone, and I know Jeremy and Taylor, just via email. I think Taylor might have mentioned this too, but describe your time here. I think you were here for a month, right? You were here for winter study with them for a little, right? So
Yeah,
just talk
a bit
about
more than a
that
month.
time, a little bit more than a month, right? So talk about your experience there. I know you had some vision. Obviously, you saw wolves through their scopes. Just talk about those experiences and those feelings, everything that was coming up for you in that little over a month period of time when you were here and seeing wolves in the park.
Right. So basically, I came to the US as a visiting researcher at the Yellowstone Wolf Cougar Elk Project, and I got the chance to join a winter predation study in March 2024. And this was thanks to all networking and connections that happened during conferences and during meetings. So this is really the power of science and the academic world in a way that really makes you connect and visit each other study sites, which I think give us so much perspective. So I'm really happy and grateful to all the people that make this possible. So that's very important. And I came and I joined the winter predation study. So I was mostly on the ground in the observation team, but I was also doing cluster checks for wolves mainly and for cougar as well. So I could really see the different efforts that are done during winter predation studies in Yellowstone, and there were also the aerial team. So they really tackle predation from so many different angles, and I think it's very, very cool what's going on and what's coming out of their research after so many years. And the feelings were many for sure. And I think it could sound strange, but the most exciting and maybe touching moment was not really the first time I saw the wolves, but rather the last time I saw them and I had to leave. Because, I mean, of course, it was really exciting to see them for the first time. But what happened is that day by day, I started to get to know the pack. So we were following Rescue Creek pack. And I was starting to learn the different individuals with the huge help of Taylor and Jeremy, which were very patient. I'm a really a big hug to them if they're going to listen to this. And what I found really fascinating is that I was really learning how to recognize the individuals, so the different members of the pack, their routes, their daily routes, their weekly routes, where they would show up next. So really knowing each corner of that road, each corner of those different peaks. And I think that was really special. And the fact that I was following the same pack, we were following the same pack for an entire month is an experience that very few can have. And I felt extremely lucky. And still now I have strong memories and strong flashbacks of that time.
Do you think, obviously, and it's so wonderful to hear the community, the science community, helping each other out and going to these, like you said, going to different research sites. Are you taking any of their methods back with you, or is there any sort of information you gathered from there that you're going to try and implement or try and extend it to your research, or vice versa, because there's so many different avenues that you guys are trying to hit in different countries?
I think what's interesting is that this has been done before me. So basically, there is a lot of parallelism and a lot of good discussions and connections within the Yellowstone National Park and the Scandinavian community. So, yeah, definitely the use of GPS collars or VHF collars, whatever it is, and the use of cluster checks for predation is something that has made the history by now. So I would say that for me, what was interesting is to see how it's done in the two different countries. So, I mean, how it's done in Yellowstone and how it's done in Scandinavia, and seeing merely all the different protocols, how we track all these behaviors, how we track all these predation events, and it's really a huge effort that is conducted in these places.
For you as a researcher, what is the one part of your job that you look forward to? I would say daily, weekly, whatever it is. Is there something that, I always say juices flowing, but what's something that really gets your blood pumping? Is it out when you're collecting scat? What's something that really gives you, like, I can't believe I'm doing this job kind of a feeling?
I think, as you say, it's when I'm out, because when I'm out in the field, I really connect with what I'm studying, and I think it's very important to follow the whole cycle from the conceptualization of a study and doing the study design. I think that's also very fun, and trying really to understand all the things you want to look at. But the part of going out in the field really keeps me connected to what I'm doing. And to be honest, I really realized that when I went to Yellowstone, I was actually making a diary when I was out in the field and also back in the evening. And I was actually recording because I didn't have the energy to write. And a few days ago, I was deleting some files and I found these files. And I was really saying, please, Cecilia of the future, remember to go out, remember to get out in the field, because that's the only way to go. And of course, when you are becoming more and more senior, it's more and more difficult. But I think it's very important that we don't forget that part, even us that are a lot behind the computer and in the lab, or yeah, just writing grants, because I would say that's a crucial part to also to, I would say, to generate new questions, because questions sometimes come out from anecdotal things that you see out in the field. And this is something related to Yellowstone that I really want to say, because, and it's related to what I'm saying, because when I was out in the field and I saw a hunting event, the first hunting event that I've seen, both successful and unsuccessful hunting events, I really understood things that I didn't understand before, to be honest, that I've been reading over and over in different research publications. And I have probably been writing them in my own PhD thesis, but only when being out and really seeing how this interaction of predator prey are happening, I really probably think I understood those things.
It's really a poignant point that you make, is not to lose the connection with the outside and the nature part of it, because you're right. Many of us get stuck behind technology and everything that happens, or like you said, research and writing. So yeah, it's always very much a point that we try to drive home too, is to get outside and see the things that you've read in books, or maybe you've seen, and if you get the opportunity to do it, to do that. This really has been such a wonderful conversation with you, and just understanding your passion, the work that you're doing, and all the things that are still to come. I think that's the more exciting part for me, is that not only what you're doing, but you named, I want to say 4 or 5 other parts of research that are coming in the field. And that's always the exciting part, is that there's so much more to come. And then, like you said, always asking the question, what's the next question to answer? So for anyone who's listening to this, who wants to not only read the work that you've done, where can they find that? And on top of that, what's the best way to see what's happening with Scandinavian Wolf Project?
So for the Scandinavian Wolf Project, Scandal, I would say the best is to look at their website, because they have a very nice website that I'm happy to share, and that's really informative, because you not only have the publications, but you also have all the scientific reports, the technical reports that I've been writing, also about the monitoring, indeed, and as well all the theses of students, of PhD students, master students. So that's really a good source. And for myself, I think Twitter is a platform that I use quite frequently. If I'm publishing new papers, if I have job opportunities to offer, if I have done interviews or press releases or stuff like that. So Twitter would be a good source.
Great. My last question for you, Cecilia, is when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Ooh, maybe two things.
Go ahead.
One is a scat, because that's what I've been doing for 6 years, working with scats and wolves. But maybe the other thing is dawn and dusk, because that's really when I was at Yellowstone, I could see that those were the most exciting moments of the day where things are happening with wolves.
Really excited to see what comes next for you, for Scandinavian Wolf Project, and just all the things that are happening there. It's so great to get this world view perspective from folks like yourself. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all this information with everybody who's listening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just hang tight while I sign off here real fast. House to you all out there. Be with you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.